My brother looked me dead in the eye and told me he expected me to cover his children's expenses, as if it were a foregone conclusion. The fork hovered halfway to my mouth. Everyone else at the table stopped moving. I placed the utensil down slowly, met his stare and said, "Since when did I co-sign for their existence? I'm Vanessa Cole, 33 years old, and over the last decade I discovered that kinship can transform generosity into a demanding bill if you're not vigilant." We were gathered in my mother's formal dining room, beneath that same antique crystal chandelier that had illuminated every significant family event, every celebration, and every quiet tension for as long as I could remember. My brother Derek didn't crack a smile. His wife, Amelia, kept her eyes locked on her glass of white wine as though searching for an escape route inside it. Their 2 young children were in the adjacent den, their laughter from some cartoon filtering through the walls. Mom pressed her linen napkin against her lips. "Vanessa," she murmured, the single word carrying a familiar warning. But Derek leaned backward in his chair, his expression shifting to one of wounded pride, as if I had publicly humiliated him. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and withdrew a single sheet of paper, which he slid across the polished mahogany table. "All right," he stated, "then take a look at this." The document stopped precisely between us. Nobody reached for it. Derek's gaze remained fixed on me, unnervingly composed in a way that triggered a knot of unease in my stomach. "Go on," he urged. I picked it up and unfolded it. My initial impression was that it resembled a banking record. Then my eyes caught my own name connected to a transferred sum that made my heart stutter against my ribs. $35,000. Mom looked bewildered. Amelia appeared terrified. I studied the transaction date. The funds had moved from an old savings account I rarely monitored, exactly 4 months prior. "What is this meant to demonstrate?" I inquired. Derek offered a humorless chuckle. "Those funds were intended to support my household." My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood as I stood. "Intended to, you gave me your word." The silence that descended was suffocating. Father had been gone for nearly 5 years now. Nobody in this family ever mentioned his name during disputes, as though speaking it would summon a ghost. I examined the statement again. The receiving account belonged to a non-profit organization, one I had been quietly donating to since Dad's passing. "You're grasping at straws," I said. "No," his jaw tightened visibly. "You made a vow while Dad was on his deathbed." The accusation struck with unexpected force because I vividly recalled that hospital room. I remembered Father holding my hand with what little strength he had left, and I recalled a commitment, simply not the one Derek was now asserting. Then Derek retrieved his mobile device. "I have a recording," he announced, and in that moment I experienced a genuine flicker of fear. He placed the phone on the table like a prosecutor presenting a crucial exhibit. Mom immediately shook her head. "Derek, please don't do this." But he had already started the audio. A crackle of static filled the dining room. In the background, hospital equipment beeped steadily beneath the murmur of distant voices. Then Dad's frail, unmistakable voice emerged through the speaker. My chest constricted painfully. It had been years since I'd heard his words. I listened as he labored through a sentence. Then I heard my own younger voice replying. The room seemed to contract around me. I remembered sitting beside his bed for weeks on end, while Derek visited only sporadically, usually after receiving calls from the nursing staff. The recording continued. "Dad spoke about family, about duty, about caring for those closest to you." Then the clip ended abruptly. Derek crossed his arms triumphantly. "There, that's proof." Mom frowned deeply. "That establishes nothing. It establishes everything." "No," I countered quietly, because that's an incomplete version of the conversation. His confidence wavered momentarily, barely perceptible. I caught it. Amelia noticed it too. Dad had talked for nearly an hour that afternoon. The recording spanned less than 2 minutes, a deliberately edited excerpt. Derek leaned in closer. Everyone in this room heard the relevant part. "Then play the full version." His jaw tightened. Mom looked between us anxiously. The quiet stretched into something unbearable. Finally, Derek snatched his phone back. "There is no full version." The falsehood struck me immediately because I possessed knowledge he lacked. That conversation had been documented twice. The second copy wasn't in his control. I held Derek's gaze for an extended moment. He stared back, self-assured, oblivious to the shift occurring beneath him. "The rest exists," I stated calmly. His expression hardened. "Then where is it?" I reached for my handbag. Mom's eyes grew wide. Amelia seemed to stop breathing entirely. Inside my wallet was a faded business card from a legal practice I hadn't visited in years. It wasn't the card itself that was significant, it was the memory it represented. Father had insisted on preserving a written record of everything during his final months, not out of distrust for me, but because he understood human nature. He knew precisely what happened when grief intersected with financial matters. Derek scoffed loudly. "You're inventing excuses." "No." I placed the card next to my dinner plate. Dad's attorney possesses a duplicate of every significant conversation. The color drained from Derek's face so rapidly it seemed painful. Mom blinked rapidly. Richard kept files on everything, I confirmed with a nod. Every discussion pertaining to Father's estate had been archived at his explicit request. Derek shot to his feet. "That proves absolutely nothing," but his voice cracked audibly. For the first time that night I watched fear replace arrogance in his eyes. Then Amelia did something completely unexpected. She looked directly at me and said, "Vanessa, why don't you tell them what occurred the week before your father passed away?" Derek spun around to face his wife. "Amelia, stop." Her eyes glistened with tears, and in that instant I realized she had been harboring a weight far heavier than I'd ever imagined. Amelia's hands trembled around her wine glass. Derek stared at her the way people observe a fracture spreading beneath their feet. "Don't do this," he warned quietly. She disregarded him entirely. Mom sat rigid in her chair. The television noise from the other room had faded into irrelevance. Every ounce of attention focused on Amelia. "The week before he died," she started, her voice barely above a whisper, "Derek asked him for money." Mom inhaled sharply. Derek slammed his palm against the tabletop. "That's a lie." But Amelia continued speaking, not with anger or theatricality, but with pure exhaustion. "He claimed his business was failing." I felt a cold sensation settle deep in my abdomen. Dad had already entered hospice care at that point. Even speaking had become an ordeal for him. Amelia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Your father refused to help him. No one moved, no one interrupted. Dad told him that the estate was not a safety net." Derek's breathing had become erratic. Amelia looked toward me. After that confrontation, he was enraged. The room grew heavier with every word she uttered. I remembered Dad mentioning disappointment during one of our final private conversations. He never explained why. Now I understood. Derek pushed his chair back violently. "That version of events is false." But no one sounded convinced, not even Derek himself. Then Amelia delivered the revelation that demolished whatever remained of his defense. He wasn't asking for assistance. She swallowed audibly. "He was asking your father to alter his will." The statement hovered in the air like shattered glass. Mom appeared physically unwell. I had never witnessed her complexion turn so ashen. Derek stood beside his chair, imprisoned between rage and terror. "She's lying." His voice came out weaker than he'd intended. Amelia shook her head slowly. "No." For years, I'd perceived her as quiet and passive, someone who avoided disharmony at all costs. Now I understood she had simply been burdened too heavily for too long. "He wanted your father to diminish Vanessa's portion of the inheritance." Mom covered her mouth with both hands. I felt an unexpected calm wash over me, not because the revelation didn't wound me, but because it finally explained so much. The resentment, the entitlement, the endless assumption that I should subsidize his lifestyle. None of it had emerged after Dad died. It had germinated long before. Derek pointed an accusatory finger at me. "You always believed you were superior to everyone else." I laughed softly. His accusation reeked of desperation. "I paid my own tuition debt." His face contorted with fury. "I established my company from nothing." He looked away, unable to maintain eye contact. "I never once asked Dad to rescue me." The truth landed with more weight than any insult could have carried. Amelia lowered her gaze. "Your father refused because he said Vanessa had genuinely earned everything she possessed." Derek grabbed his car keys. The mask was crumbling entirely now. Then Mom spoke, not loudly, not emotionally, just with a firmness that commanded attention. "Sit down." For the first time in our entire lives, Derek obeyed without protest, and that terrified him more than anything else. He lowered himself back into his chair wordlessly. The quiet that followed was more oppressive than any argument we'd ever endured. Mom folded her hands methodically on the table. She wasn't trembling anymore. That frightened me the most. Growing up, Mom avoided confrontation at any cost. She smoothed things over, invented excuses, protected fragile feelings. The woman seated across from Derek was someone entirely different, tougher, more transparent. 15 years, she said softly. Derek stared at the tabletop. 15 years I've defended you. He offered no response. I convinced myself you were just struggling. Mom's voice held steady, but a tear escaped down her cheek. I convinced myself you needed extra support. She paused, collecting herself. But you weren't seeking assistance. You were demanding allegiance you never demonstrated. I observed his shoulders sag, not dramatically, just enough to reveal the truth had finally broken through his defenses. Mom turned her gaze toward me. The sorrow in her eyes hurt more deeply than Derek's accusations ever could. Vanessa, how much total have you given him over all these years? I hesitated briefly, then answered honestly, approximately $240,000. The room went absolutely still. Even Amelia seemed shocked by the number. Mom squeezed her eyes shut. Derek looked up with a sharp movement. I could see calculations shifting behind his gaze. Not remorse, not shame, something darker, expectation. Then he spoke, and in one sentence he annihilated the last shred of credibility anyone had left for him. Then what difference does another $35,000 make? No one answered him, not immediately. The question lay at the center of the table like a rotting fruit, exposing everything Derek had spent years attempting to conceal. Mom stared at him as though she were seeing a stranger. Amelia began weeping quietly. I felt something unexpected wash through me. Not fury, but release, because the bewilderment was finally over. There was no misunderstanding, no complicated family miscommunication, no hidden justification waiting to be uncovered. Derek genuinely believed my success belonged to him. Mom rose from her seat. Hand me your house key. Derek blinked in confusion. What? The key. His face lost all remaining color. The modest rental home he occupied belonged to Mom. She had charged him below market rent for years. Mom, are you serious? She extended her open palm. I refuse to support someone who confuses goodwill with obligation. For the first time, no one defended him, not even Amelia. Derek slowly removed the key from his chain and placed it in his mother's hand. The metallic sound seemed louder than it should have, a door closing, a consequence arriving. I rose from my chair and gathered my purse. Before walking away, I looked directly at my brother. I love your children deeply, I told him, but being their aunt never made me their financier. He lowered his gaze to the table. For the first time all evening, he was completely silent, and that emptiness became the only inheritance he genuinely deserved.